to introduce my wife, Roberta, who is also my body man, chief cook, bottle washer. I mean, when you're in a wheelchair, pretty much you need somebody to help you, and she certainly does that. Anybody have a violin? Fortunately, again, when you have a wheelchair, you kind of got to improvise a little bit. So I vividly recall the first time I ever had to speak in front of a group in a professional capacity. I had recently gotten my first job after graduating from the Citadel. I was the field marketing trainee for Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, at their corporate headquarters in Dublin, Ohio, just outside of Columbus. Now, I kind of thought I was all that because I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And I'd been at Wendy's about 3 months when one morning around 11 o'clock, I received a telephone call from the secretary, and they were called secretaries back then, sorry, they're not admins, I know today. Secretary to the Executive Vice President for Marketing and Advertising, Bill Welter, asking me to come to his office. Now, Bill was responsible for everything worldwide when it came to marketing and advertising with Wendy's. I had zero interaction with Bill. Kind of, if you think of a totem pole, Bill would have been on the top, I would have been the part buried in the ground. That's how little interaction that I had with Bill. So I was sort of nervous and excited as I walked down the hall to his office, and when I got there, the secretary, Vicky, was waiting for me with a binder in her hand. She explained to me that Bill was supposed to give a speech to a group of, and I kid you not, this is the honest to God's truth, bankers at a luncheon in downtown Columbus. But he was tied up and he asked if I would give the presentation in his place. Vicky handed me the binder, which contained the presentation, gave me the address to the hotel, and told me that if I left right now, I should make it just in time. Now keep in mind, this was before cell phones and GPS was available. So I think I literally sprinted to the car and pulled out the map of Columbus and found the best route to get to the hotel. I did arrive just in time to let the person in charge know that I would be replacing Bill. So here were all these bankers expecting Bill Welter, Executive Vice President, and they got Terry Tucker, field marketing trainee, whose most significant business accomplishment to date was making copies, ordering and picking up lunch, and my personal favorite, gassing up the company cars of the field marketing managers. Needless to say, I bombed the presentation, trying to give someone else a speech that you have never seen before, made for an absolute disaster. But even though I was anxious, even though I was worried, even though I was nervous, I gave that speech to the best of my ability. And that's what I'd like to talk with you a little bit this morning. Embracing the hard and challenging times that we all experience in life and using those difficult circumstances to make us stronger and more resilient individuals. Not to state the obvious, but I am in a wheelchair and I have lost most of my left leg as a result of a 10-year battle with cancer. Well, I haven't really lost my leg. I know where it is. It's in a lab at the University of Colorado Hospital. And every 3 weeks when I go there for treatment, I'll sometimes stop by the lab and check on it, see how it's doing. Occasionally we'll have lunch together and stuff like that. Now, you all know that's a joke, but I made that joke at a previous talk, and a woman came up to me afterwards and asked me if I really did have lunch with my amputated leg. So, I do not, but I'll let you guys decide where we go from there. Fortunately, I've learned many things during this ordeal, not the least of which is what I call my 4 truths. They're not mine. I don't own them. I don't think you can own a truth, but they certainly are an incredibly important part of my life. And the 4 truths, and you don't have to write these down, I promise. 4 truths are: control your mind, embrace your pain. What you leave behind is what you weave on the hearts of other people. And as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. But how did I come to understand these truths? And maybe more importantly, how did I come to apply them in my life? 2012, as Wayne said, I was a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas when I had a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my 3rd toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, and I don't know why I do this, I think there's x-ray something up here, but he said, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did, and he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately, or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. Now, 2 weeks later, I received a call from him, and as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And because your cancer is so incredibly rare, I recommend you go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated. And so I did. I had 2 surgeries to remove the tumor on the bottom of my foot and all the lymph nodes in my groin. And then I had a skin graft to close the wound on the bottom of my foot. After I healed, my oncologist put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. Now, interferon for me was just a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug. The side effects of interferon were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And that was not a cure. That was, as my oncologist used to say, we're trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more time. 2017, the interferon became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever or a body temperature of 108 degrees, which usually is not compatible with being alive. Fortunately, I had presented at a level 1 trauma center and they were able to stabilize me before sending me to the ICU. Because of the adverse reaction to the interferon, I had to stop taking the drug. And almost immediately after stopping the interferon, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it presented 5 years earlier. And that necessitated in 2018 the amputation of my left foot. The melanoma worked its way up my shin. Got awful quiet here. This is going to be fun. Trust me, we're talking about cancer. Come on. All right, gotta have a little fun. Gotta have a little fun. All right. The melanoma worked its way up my shin in 2019, requiring 2 more surgeries. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone, which required the amputation of my left foot. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm currently being treated for now. Now, my amputation occurred right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. I was not allowed to have anyone with me. My wife literally dropped me off at the hospital. My surgeon had to get special permission to do the surgery, and I was the only operation that day. Now, the upside of having your leg amputated is that I now get that upfront handicap parking that I've wanted for such a long period of time, and shoes are a whole lot less expensive. So, now, I know this journey sounds very dark and ugly, and it certainly has been, but I've learned a couple of things in addition to the 4 truths. The first thing I've learned is that I don't think you really know yourself until you've been tested by adversity. And secondly, cancer, and this is going to sound really weird, cancer's made me a better person. It's made me a better person because I've come to understand these 4 truths. And I want to say this before we dive into these truths. I make no claims to have all the answers about overcoming discomfort and difficulty in our lives. But these truths have worked for me, and I'm sharing them with you in the hope that they can help you deal with the difficulties that you experience in your life. Each one of these truths is one sentence. I have them written on a Post-it note in my office at home, and so I see them multiple times during the day, and they constantly get reinforced in my brain. So let's take a look at these truths. Truth number 1, you must control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. You can't tell this from looking at me in this chair, but I'm actually 6 foot 8 inches tall, and I went to the Citadel on a basketball scholarship. In high school, I was a pretty good athlete, but I was slowed by 3 knee surgeries. And I remember when I went back playing basketball, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. You know, things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since these surgeries, and coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you because of that. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I knew I had to change the narrative that my brain was putting into my thoughts. Now, it's estimated on any given day we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our minds, many of which we don't even pay attention to. But the problem with most people, and I am guilty of this probably more times than I care to admit, the problem with most people is they think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. If you want to overcome the difficulties that you experience in life, you have to control the thoughts in your brain, because we all become what we think. Bobby Knight, the former basketball coach in Indiana, used to have a great saying that I absolutely love, and it goes like this: mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here's this great coach teaching premier athletes to use their bodies to be great basketball players. But what he's really saying with that quote is that your mind, or your mindset, is 4 times more important than anything that your physical body is going to do. That's truth number 1. Truth number 2, embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. Our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. To the brain, the status quo, the way things are right now, is comfortable and familiar and should just be left alone. The problem with that is the only way we're going to grow, the only way we're going to get better, the only way we're going to improve is if we step outside our comfort zones and we do the things that make us uncomfortable. When I was coaching high school basketball, you can ask my players, I used to constantly remind them that they needed to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're all going to experience pain in our lives, and it doesn't have to be cancer pain or even any kind of an illness. It could be as simple as you break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or the airline you're traveling on to get here cancels or delays your flight, or you have an accident on the way to church, or you don't get the promotion at work that you believe you deserve. Pain is inevitable in our lives. Suffering, on the other hand, suffering's optional. Suffering's what you do with that pain. Do you take it and use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? To make yourself more resilient to pain, let me offer this suggestion. I do this every day of my life. As a matter of fact, I'm doing it right now. Do one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that is potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every day, when the big things in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we get let go from our job, we find out we have some kind of a terminal illness. If you do those small things every day, when the big things in life happen, you'll be so much more resilient to handle the pain when it presents itself. Now I'm going to date myself a little bit here. Back in 1976, country's bicentennial, I was 16 years old. There was a U.S. gold medal winning Olympic swimmer by the name of Shirley Babishoff, who had one of the greatest quotes that I ever heard. And this is what she said: winners think about what they want to happen. Losers think about what they don't want to happen. Winners can override their negative brains and focus on the things that they want to occur. Losers focus on the negative aspects of competition and can't see the value of pursuing a goal or a dream. Most people will never get to where they want to be in life because they won't stop whining and complaining about where they're at. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. If you want to overcome the difficulties that you experience in life, instead of running from pain, do just the opposite. Take that pain, flip it inside, burn it as fuel, use it as energy to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. That's truth number 2. Truth number 3, what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. Now, to me, this is a legacy truth. I believe it's important for all of us, regardless of what stage of life we're in, to think about the end game of our lives. Regardless, if you're starting out, you're middle age, or you're coming to the end of the road like me and Wayne. It's important to think about what the end game is going to be. What are people going to say about you at your funeral? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? I have friends who actually read the newspaper, read the obituary page in the newspaper or online every day for 2 reasons. Number 1, to keep themselves humble. And number 2, to remind themselves that someday somebody's going to be reading their obituary. After I had my leg amputated and I found out I had these tumors in my lungs, I went with my wife to the mortuary and to the cemetery and to the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I give these talks and I'm a guest on podcasts where I talk about the importance of motivation and the need to keep moving forward, I actually got some brushback from people who commented that somehow planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. I had to remind these people that the last time I checked, we're all gonna die. Don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is really going to live. I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love, and it goes like this. When you were born, you cried, and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries, and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. Don't get me wrong, I'm not looking to hasten my demise in any way, shape, or form. But death isn't nearly as scary for me because I believed I found my purpose in life and I lived that purpose. That's truth number 3. Truth number 4. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. Now, this truth to me is rather self-explanatory, but the way this truth resonates with me is this. Someday my pain is going to end. May end through surgery, may end through some type of new medication. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, then pain will always be a part of my life. If you want to overcome the difficulties that you experience in life, think about the 40% rule that I learned from the Navy SEALs. My wife works with a young man who's a former Navy SEAL, and he's kind enough on my off weeks of treatment to call me and just check up on me and see how I'm doing. And a lot of times we'll talk about what the SEALs call their 40% rule. And what that says is basically, if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you don't think you can go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So the next time you think you're at the end of your rope, the next time you don't think you can stay late at the office and finish that report, the next time you don't think you can get off the couch and go to the gym, remember, you have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So there you have it, the 4 truths. Control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. Embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more determined individual. Number 3, what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And number 4, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. Let me close with one final story, if I may. I've always been a big fan of Western television and movies growing up. I'm going to date myself a little bit here now, too. When I was a little kid, my mom and dad used to let me stay up late and watch Bonanza and Gunsmoke, and my favorite was Wild Wild West. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it. It was a huge blockbuster. It's still being shown on reruns right now. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday, and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were 2 living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made-up characters for the movie. Now, Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. Wyatt Earp, most of his adult life, was some form of a lawman. So these 2 men from entirely opposite backgrounds somehow come together and form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying of tuberculosis at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And the real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. Glenwood Springs is about 3 hours from here. Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, has no job, has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the 2 men pass the time that way. And in one of the final scenes of the movie, the 2 men are talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, you know, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? But Wyatt kind of nonchalantly looks at him and says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life. And get on with living yours. Most likely, we know people in our lives. You may be one of those people right now that's sort of sitting back and saying, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. When that occurs, I'll have a successful life. When this arises, I'll have a significant life. What I'd like to leave you with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth, use your unique gifts and talents, and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you 2 things. Number 1, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoy your stay in Colorado.